A, B, C. A, always, B, B, C, closing. Always be closing. Always be closing.
Such a great scene.
It was.
Yeah. So instead of always be closing, the title of today's video is Always Be Selling on Bootstrap, the self-funded entrepreneur with Frank Cianciulli. My name is Matthew Lay, and as always, I am going to be your host. Frank, I know what it means because I was raised in it, but when you say that at the Wish Group you have a culture of sales, what does that mean?
Well, it means you're always focused on growth, always focused on growing the business. I mean, obviously, there's within a day or a week or a month, there's always going to be different challenges and operational challenges and things that come up that can distract you. And from my experience, the difference between the companies that make it or become successful or continue to grow versus those that don't is that regardless of the distraction, they stay focused on the task at hand,
right?
Which is to continue to bring in business, because sales solves all problems.
Yeah, more revenue can deal with all kinds of issues, right?
Exactly, where if you stop selling to try and fix a problem, well, then the cash dries up.
Yeah, so. Exactly. So, I mean, you came at this entrepreneurialism from a sales background. That's what you did before you started your first business, but not everyone does. There are engineers, there are developers, there's all kinds of different people out there watching this show. What advice do you give those people who maybe aren't comfortable with the whole Glengarry, Glen Ross-ish kind of sales idea?
No, fair enough. And I mean, and Glengarry's a typical sales organization,
right.
Which, you know, at Wish we definitely come more so from that background. But even those other disciplines, I mean, once they get into business, they do have to start to become comfortable with the sales process. It doesn't necessarily have to be that structured. You don't necessarily have sales managers at that point, but you know, understanding your vision and your product, and knowing how to share that with prospective investors or clients. Even if you're an engineer, you're going to figure that out.
Yeah, yeah. And one strategy I've seen you do that kind of forces the issue is the way you structure compensation plans. Mm-hmm. They're all based around earned income, right?
Correct.
Talk a bit about that and the importance.
Yeah, so I mean, I think when you've got larger organizations, established firms, multi-billion-dollar multinational companies that usually have a big piece of the market share, they're more interested in keeping it, maintaining. I mean, I'm sure they're also focused on growth, but a much smaller clip.
Well, I mean, their growth numbers, their targets are nowhere near where you need to be when you're starting your own business. Yeah,
if you're a multi-billion-dollar organization, you grow by 1%, you're probably still growing by tens of millions.
Yeah, exactly.
But in a startup environment or a younger business, you're trying to acquire market share.
Yeah.
You know, so it's important that you're focused on growth at that point.
Yeah, and that incentive across the board for growth.
Correct. So if you're in an organization where you're focused on maintaining, usually they're compensated kind of highly on the secured, so let's say a high base salary,
right,
and some upside or bonus, but they can afford to do that.
Yeah.
But in an entrepreneurial environment, you know, it can become very detrimental to try and compete with those firms by, you know, let's say giving salespeople high base salaries.
Right.
What you want to do is give them an opportunity to actually earn more than they would at a large company, but less secured or guaranteed. So smaller base salary,
exactly,
but more upside once the revenue comes in.
Right. So there's no PhD in sales or account management. You're not going to be able to hire out of school. If you're not a salesperson, you're not going to be able to hire a great salesperson.
There should be courses in school in sales, but usually there isn't.
Yeah, there isn't. So when you're running the organization, you know, how do you go about finding like a sales process? What, do you hire people to do it for you? Do you bring in sales trainers? What's your best suggestion for that?
Actually, it's a combination of all those.
Yeah.
You know, usually, you know, we've figured out a formula that works, and then we're trying to add people that fit into that culture. But yeah, you can work with different, even your mentors or different sales trainers to understand the process that works best for your particular industry. But at the end of the day, it's got to be a performance-based culture. So you really want to analyze your KPIs, your key performance indicators, which could be, you know, the amount of meetings that it takes to bring on business, how many, you know, let's say emails or phone calls, you know, to decision makers you need in order to get a certain amount of meetings, and then just kind of really monitor that, communicate that, have that posted on boards for everybody to see, create a competitive environment from that perspective as well.
Okay. So you mentioned KPIs, and I know that there are, CEOs or sales leaders at big organizations who are sitting there staring at the CRM every single day to see what's happened and what hasn't. Don't got the time for that when you're in a startup, or even, I'm sure you don't even have time for that now after many years in business. So how do you ensure that KPI management is still in place?
Well, especially in a younger company, I think, people say sales is a science.
Okay.
There's numbers involved, and if you establish the KPIs and follow them, you usually should get a result. But it's also an art, and especially in a younger company where you maybe don't have all these tools to track the KPIs. There's a lot of it that has to be done by feel, and a lot of that is even we set up our offices in a certain way as well.
Okay.
The open concept really lends well for that, so you kind of know if people are working and making their numbers. I don't even need to look into a sales CRM dashboard to know what the salespeople are doing. I can feel it, I can see it, I can gauge it by the sound on the floor, so to speak.
Yeah, and you walk the floor too, right? It's not, don't stay in that office.
Yes, and that's what I encourage young companies, even more established ones, is there's a tendency to create a mahogany row, or sometimes sales managers end up going in their offices and they lose the feel of what's happening on the floor. I say get out there on the floor, walk the floor, hear some good things, go try and find opportunities to compliment or praise someone who's doing something good, or someone who just had a good call. Or if you hear something that you didn't like, be able to coach immediately and sit down with that person and say, hey, when you said this, maybe you could have tried this instead.
Yeah, and do you still get on the street sometimes?
Oh, absolutely. I love getting out. I love when people take me out, because that's where it all happens. That's where you really get a sense for what the market's looking for. I mean, I always feel that innovation is ultimately driven by the customer. So in order to really get a sense for that, you got to get out in front of the customers, hear what some of their challenges are, and be able to take that back to the office and find solutions.
On a tactical side, I know that every sales rep in the organization, your organization, has to actually send in KPIs on a Friday. What was the origin of that, and why do you find that valuable?
Yeah, and I think sometimes people think, well, that's just reporting and Big Brother looking out and making sure I did my job. No, that's not really it. I mean, there is that as well, but it's ultimately for the salesperson to do some self-assessment at the end of the week. Okay. They've probably gone into that week with goals that they wanted to achieve, and
well, they should have gone in with goals.
They should have, correct. They should have sat down with the sales manager and identified what their goals should be for that week, what they wanted to accomplish, how many meetings they wanted to book, if they wanted to close any business. So at the end of the week, when they take a few minutes at the end of the day to kind of outline what their activity was, what some wins they might have had, where they didn't achieve what they wanted to, it gives them a chance to assess, maybe come out the next week with a stronger focus on what they wanted to accomplish, and it gives us an opportunity to catch them doing something right. Being able to praise if they've done something really great, or comment on what could have been better.
Exactly, and and being in it again, I see it across not just sales, but this idea of the Friday KPI and that self-assessment has actually become something that marketing does and operations do for all the same reasons.
Yeah, I mean, it's about keeping accountability as well.
All right. Well, always be selling. Be staying in the culture. That's the time that we have. If you have sales-specific questions, if you're an unfunded startup, send them to the email on the screen, or make a comment on the website, and we'll handle it in one of our Ask Frank segments, or Frank will get back to you personally. Next week, we're going to talk about a tactic that Frank has employed within all of his organizations called open book reporting. So until then, share, tell your friends, tell your colleagues and coworkers about the show, and keep it lean.